A masked figure stands at a doorstep in the dead of night. An 84-year-old grandmother vanishes without a trace. And 5 theories that could crack this case wide open. What if everything we think we know is wrong? February 1st, 2026. Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie disappears from her home in the early morning hours. No signs of struggle inside. No witnesses. Just a chilling piece of doorbell camera footage showing someone who clearly did not want to be seen. And here is the twist. Nancy is not just anyone. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the face of NBC's Today Show, which means this case has every ingredient for a media firestorm. Celebrity connections. Mysterious evidence. And a family desperate for answers. 12 days later, the FBI is tracking multiple persons of interest, but they still will not name a single suspect. A pair of gloves found near Nancy's home is being tested for DNA. Alleged ransom notes have surfaced demanding money. And that masked figure remains unidentified. So what really happened to Nancy Guthrie? Before we dive in, drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love seeing where our community tunes in from across the globe. Now here is the thing. This case is not just about one theory. It is about 5 completely different directions this investigation could go. And one of them might be closer to the truth than anyone wants to admit. If you are into true crime mysteries that will keep you up at night, you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this case has more twists than a Hollywood thriller. Let me walk you through 5 theories that investigators are likely exploring right now. By the end of this video, you will see why this case is far more complex than the headlines suggest. Let us get into it. To understand these theories, we need to establish the timeline, because in cases like this, timing is everything. January 31st, evening. Nancy Guthrie is at her daughter Annie's house in Tucson for what appears to be a completely normal family gathering. She takes an Uber over around 5:30 in the evening. They have dinner together. They play games. It is the kind of evening that happens in families across America every single day. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Just quality time with loved ones. Around 9:45 that night, a family member drives Nancy back to her own home, which is only about 10 minutes away. Now here is where it gets interesting. The sheriff's department will not say which family member drove her home. They have kept that detail under wraps. And when pressed about whether that family member saw Nancy safely inside the house, the sheriff gave a very specific answer. Yes. We will come back to why that matters. Fast forward to the early morning hours of February 1st. Nancy's doorbell camera captures footage of a masked individual standing on her doorstep. This person is wearing a backpack, appears to be armed, and is clearly trying to avoid detection. They notice the camera, seem momentarily startled by a floodlight, and then attempt to cover the lens with random debris from the porch. And then Nancy Guthrie is gone. When family members arrive the next day to check on her, she is not there. Her Apple Watch is still in the house. There are reports of concerning evidence at the scene that we will not get into graphically out of respect for the family, but it is enough to make investigators treat this as a critical abduction case. Within hours, the FBI is involved. Massive search efforts begin. Media descends on Tucson, and the Guthrie family, including Savannah, makes public pleas for Nancy's safe return. But here is what makes this case so unusual. Nancy was not just randomly targeted. She is 84 years old with significant health issues. She could not walk more than 50 yards without assistance. She needed daily medication that without it could become life-threatening. This is what investigators call a low-risk victim, someone who does not put themselves in dangerous situations, does not have risky lifestyle factors, and lives a relatively quiet life. Which means whoever took her likely knew her, or at the very least knew of her. The evidence so far includes that doorbell footage, a pair of gloves found near her home that are being tested for DNA, and alleged ransom notes that were sent to media outlets like TMZ and local Tucson television stations. These notes demanded money. They mentioned specific details like Nancy's Apple Watch being left behind. They referenced floodlights outside her home that have since been removed. But here is the strange part. Those ransom notes came with 2 deadlines. Both deadlines passed. And there has been no follow-up communication that we know of. No proof of life images. No further demands. Just silence. The FBI has offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to Nancy or the identification of whoever took her. They have made it clear they are pursuing multiple persons of interest, but they have not named anyone publicly. Quick question before we continue. What is the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, snowing? Let me know in the comments. I am always curious about where you all are tuning in from. Alright, now here is where things get really interesting. Law enforcement has not named any suspects, but the evidence and investigation activity point in 5 very different directions. Some of these theories are more plausible than others. Some are downright uncomfortable. But all of them deserve examination. Let us break them down. Theory number 1. Someone in the family knows more than they are saying. I know that is a heavy way to start, but here is the reality of criminal investigations. Law enforcement always starts with the people closest to the victim. It is not because they assume guilt. It is because statistically, when someone goes missing or is harmed, the perpetrator is often someone they know. Someone they trust. Someone with access. And in Nancy's case, there are details that have kept investigators circling back to family members. Let us start with the timeline. Nancy was last seen with family at her daughter Annie's house. A family member drove her home around 9:45 that evening. That family member, according to the sheriff, saw Nancy safely inside her house. But the sheriff will not say who that family member was. Why the secrecy? If it is just standard protocol, fine. But it has raised questions. Then there is the activity at Annie's house. Investigators have returned to that location repeatedly, almost daily in some cases. They have conducted consensual searches, meaning Annie and her husband have allowed law enforcement in without requiring a search warrant. That is usually a sign of cooperation, not guilt. But the sheer volume of attention directed at that house has people asking what exactly they are looking for. At one point, investigators were seen leaving Annie's home carrying a bag. They were wearing gloves. The contents of that bag have not been disclosed. Now, it could be anything. Documents, electronics, items submitted for testing. But in the absence of information, speculation rushes in to fill the void. Here is another detail that stands out. The sheriff mentioned that investigators have data from Nancy's garage door. It opened at 9:48 in the evening and closed at 9:50. That timing aligns precisely with when the family member would have been dropping Nancy off. But here is the question. If the family member saw Nancy safely inside, did they enter through the garage or through the front door? Because if they went through the front door, they would have been in a position to notice any evidence of a disturbance. And if they went through the garage, why is that not more clearly reflected in the timeline? These are the kinds of investigative gaps that keep detectives awake at night. Now let us be clear about something. The Guthrie family has been described by law enforcement as fully cooperative. They have made public pleas for Nancy's return. Savannah, Annie, and their brother Cameron appeared together, visibly emotional, saying they would pay any ransom demanded. They are clearly devastated. But here is the uncomfortable truth about investigations. Cooperation does not equal innocence, and suspicion does not equal guilt. Detectives have to examine everyone in the inner circle, not because they want to accuse grieving family members, but because they have to eliminate every possibility before they can move forward with certainty. So why does this theory persist? First, Nancy was a low-risk victim. She did not go out much. She did not have risky habits or associations. She lived a quiet life in Tucson. For someone like that to be targeted, it almost always means the perpetrator had inside knowledge. They knew her routine. They knew when she would be home alone. They knew the layout of her house. They knew about her health vulnerabilities. Second, there is the question of potential motive. Savannah Guthrie is wealthy and famous. She has been the co-anchor of the Today Show for over a decade. She interviews presidents and celebrities. She has connections and resources. If someone wanted to extort the family or gain access to that wealth, Nancy would be a deeply vulnerable target. Third, there is the question of access. Who had keys to Nancy's house? Who knew her alarm code? Who could get in without triggering suspicion? Family members would naturally top that list. But here is where the theory begins to weaken. If a family member was involved, why draw so much attention? Why make public pleas? Why allow repeated searches of your home? Why cooperate so openly with investigators? Guilty people tend to lawyer up and shut down communication. The Guthries have done the opposite. Also, there is no known history of family conflict. No reports of financial disputes. No indication of estrangement or resentment. By all accounts, this was a close-knit family that cared deeply about Nancy. So where does that leave us? The family connection theory is not about pointing fingers. It is about understanding that investigators must look at everyone with access and opportunity. They have to ask hard questions. They have to follow every lead, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. And until they can definitively rule out everyone in that inner circle, the theory remains on the table. This case has more layers than you might think. If you are hooked already, smash that like button so YouTube knows you want more deep dives like this. Seriously, it helps more than you know. Alright? Theory number 2. And this one takes us in a completely different direction. What if Nancy was not the real target at all? What if this was always about Savannah? Theory number 2 suggests that Nancy Guthrie was taken specifically because she is the mother of one of the most recognizable faces in American television. Let us think about this logically. Savannah Guthrie has been co-hosting the Today Show since 2012. She has interviewed presidents, A-list celebrities, CEOs, and world leaders. She appears in millions of homes every single morning. She has wealth, fame, and influence. And with all of that comes risk. High-profile individuals are targets. That is not speculation. That is an unavoidable reality. Celebrities and their families deal with stalkers, threats, and obsessed individuals on a regular basis. Most of the time, security teams handle these situations quietly, but sometimes things escalate beyond anyone's control. NBC has confirmed that investigators have been in contact with their security division to review any threats Savannah may have received. That is standard protocol in a case like this, but it also tells us that the celebrity angle is being taken seriously by those running the investigation. Now let us talk about the ransom notes. These alleged notes were sent to media outlets, TMZ, and local Tucson television stations, demanding money for Nancy's return. If this was truly about extortion, targeting the family of a wealthy public figure makes a certain kind of twisted sense. The perpetrator could have believed that Savannah would pay anything to get her mother back safely. But here is where this theory gets complicated. The ransom notes were sent the day after Nancy disappeared. That is unusually fast. Most kidnappers who are serious about collecting a ransom wait. They establish control first. They prove they have the victim. They negotiate from a position of power. But in this case, the notes came almost immediately, and then there was nothing. 2 deadlines passed. No follow-up. No proof of life. No further communication. That is not how professional extortion works. Real kidnappers, especially those targeting high-profile families, are calculated and methodical. They understand that law enforcement will be involved. They plan their communication carefully. They provide evidence that the victim is alive, because without that proof, there is no incentive for the family to pay. But these notes feel impulsive, almost amateurish. Rushed out in haste rather than crafted with precision. Then there is the question of how someone would even target Nancy in the first place. She appeared on the Today Show back in November talking about her life in Tucson and how much she loved the community. That segment was warm and personal. It showed the world a glimpse of where she lived. Not her exact address, but enough for someone determined to figure it out. Could a viewer have seen that segment and decided Nancy was an accessible way to get to Savannah? It is possible, but it would require planning, research, and surveillance. And yet the execution, the masked figure fumbling with the doorbell camera, covering it with debris, does not suggest sophisticated planning at all. There is another layer to consider here. Savannah has access to resources that most people simply do not. She has personal security. She has legal teams. She has connections to law enforcement at the highest levels. If someone wanted to extort her, they would have to know they were taking on not just a family but an entire network of protection and institutional power. So why target Nancy instead of Savannah directly? Because Nancy was vulnerable. She lived alone. She had health issues. She was elderly and could not fight back or escape easily. In the twisted logic of a criminal mind, she would be the easier target with the same potential payoff. But here is the thing that nags at investigators. If this was really about targeting a celebrity's family for money, where is the follow-through? Where is the continued pressure? Where is the negotiation? The silence after those initial ransom notes is deafening, and it tells a story all its own. Some investigators have speculated that the notes might not even be legitimate. They could have been sent by an opportunist who saw the case breaking in the news and decided to try to cash in on someone else's crime. We have seen it before. Hoaxers and scammers who inject themselves into high-profile cases for attention or money, muddying the waters and wasting precious investigative resources. In fact, there was a separate incident where someone in Los Angeles allegedly tried to demand Bitcoin in exchange for information about Nancy. That person was quickly identified and investigated. Turns out they had no connection to the case whatsoever. Just someone trying to exploit a tragedy for personal gain. So where does the celebrity target theory stand? It is plausible that Nancy was taken because of her connection to Savannah. The wealth and fame certainly create a motive. But the execution does not match the profile of someone who planned this as a calculated extortion operation. The lack of follow-through, the absence of proof of life, and the impulsive nature of the ransom notes all suggest something else entirely is going on. Either this was never really about money, or the person responsible got in way over their head and no longer knows what to do next. Theory number 3. Someone with legitimate access to Nancy's home saw an opportunity and took it. This theory focuses on a crucial detail that is easy to overlook. Nancy lived alone, but she did not live independently. At 84 years old with mobility issues and a need for daily medication, she required regular help. And help means people coming in and out of her life on a routine basis. People with keys. People with alarm codes. People who knew exactly when she would be home and when she would not. So who had access? Pool cleaners. Gardeners. Maintenance workers. Healthcare aides. Delivery drivers. Neighbors entrusted with spare keys. The list of people who could enter Nancy's home without raising suspicion is longer than most people would think. And here is the thing about people in those roles. They often become invisible. Homeowners get used to seeing the same faces week after week. They trust them implicitly. They do not question when they show up or how long they stay. And that trust, that comfortable familiarity, creates opportunity for someone with darker intentions. According to reports, law enforcement has been asking some of Nancy's hired help to provide DNA swabs. That is a significant investigative move. It means they are actively looking at people who had physical access to her property. They are trying to match DNA found at the scene, possibly from those gloves discovered nearby, to someone already in Nancy's orbit. Now let us talk about the delivery driver. His name is Carlos Palazuelos. On day 11 of the investigation, he was detained by law enforcement near Rio Rico, Arizona, which is about an hour south of Tucson, close to the Mexican border. Carlos was pulled over while working his DoorDash route. He was questioned for hours. His home was searched. His electronics were seized. And then he was released without charges. In an interview afterward, Carlos seemed genuinely confused and upset. He said he had never heard of Nancy Guthrie. He had never heard of Savannah Guthrie. He did not follow the news. He had no idea why he was being detained. But here is the key detail that cuts through his confusion. Law enforcement did not just randomly select him. They had a search warrant for his home. That means they presented evidence to a judge, evidence compelling enough for that judge to sign off on the search. You do not get a warrant on the basis of a hunch. You get it because you have data. According to reports, the FBI identified Carlos based on cell phone usage information and traffic data. His digital footprint placed him in the area during the relevant time frame. His movements matched patterns that raised red flags within the investigation. Now Carlos has suggested that as a delivery driver, he may have dropped off packages at Nancy's house during the course of his normal work. That is entirely possible and even probable. Delivery drivers hit dozens of homes per shift. If his phone pinged near Nancy's address, it could be completely innocent, just another stop on a busy route. But investigators are not going to accept that at face value. They are going to dig deeper. They are going to analyze his phone records, his delivery routes, his communications. They are going to look for any connection, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Carlos's mother-in-law told reporters that investigators showed her the surveillance footage of the masked figure and asked if it was him. She said no. But the fact that they asked tells us they considered him a viable suspect, at least temporarily, and thought the question worth putting to someone who knew him well. So why does the insider theory make so much sense in this case? First, it explains how someone got into Nancy's home without obvious signs of forced entry. If you have a key or know the alarm code, you can walk right in as though you belong there. Second, it explains the timing with almost uncomfortable precision. An insider would know Nancy's schedule. They would know when she would be home alone. They would know she had just returned from her daughter's house and would likely be settling in for the night, vulnerable and unsuspecting. Third, it explains the lack of sophistication evident in the doorbell footage. This does not look like a professional criminal operation. It looks like someone who had access, saw an opportunity, and acted on impulse rather than careful planning. But here is the complication that makes this theory difficult to narrow down. How many people have had access to Nancy's home over the months and years she lived there? How many delivery drivers have dropped off packages at her door? How many contractors have done repairs inside? How many neighbors have stopped by with a spare key? The pool of potential suspects is vast, and narrowing it down requires painstaking work. You need digital evidence. You need DNA results. You need witnesses willing to come forward. And you need time, which is the one thing this investigation may not have in abundance. The gloves found near Nancy's home could ultimately be the key that unlocks everything. If DNA on those gloves matches someone in the system or someone who has been asked to provide a sample, this case could break wide open overnight. Here is a thought. Do you think investigators are on the right track with the insider theory? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I am genuinely curious what you all think. But there are still 2 more theories to cover. And the next one is the theory that gets the most attention online, even though the experts who study this kind of crime say it is actually the least likely. Theory number 4. This was the work of an organized criminal group, possibly connected to Mexican cartels operating near the border. I will be honest with you. This theory gets enormous traction online, but it is mostly fueled by geography and speculation rather than by concrete evidence. Here is why people find it compelling. Nancy lived in Tucson, Arizona, which is roughly 60 miles from the Mexican border. The region is well known for cartel activity, drug trafficking, human smuggling, and organized crime networks that operate fluidly on both sides of the border. And when Carlos Palazuelos was detained near Rio Rico, a border town with its own complicated history, it added fuel to an already burning fire of speculation. The FBI has also indicated they are tracking multiple persons of interest, which suggests this was not necessarily a one-person operation. If multiple people are involved, it implies coordination, planning, and organizational structure. And that is precisely where the cartel theory gains its momentum. But here is where that momentum runs headlong into reality. Experts who study cartel behavior closely say this case does not fit their operational profile at all. Cartels are brutal and deliberately conspicuous when they want to be. When they kidnap someone, they send a message that cannot be misunderstood. They make it viscerally clear who holds the power. They use violence as a calculated tool of intimidation, and they do not concern themselves with elderly, low-risk victims unless there is a very specific strategic reason tied to their business interests. Nancy Guthrie does not fit that profile by any measure. She is not a government official with leverage over policy. She is not a rival cartel member encroaching on territory. She is not someone with information or institutional power that a cartel would covet. She is a grandmother living quietly in a Tucson neighborhood. Also, cartels do not typically operate this far north of the border for random kidnappings. Yes, they maintain networks in American cities. Yes, they are involved in various criminal enterprises across the Southwest. But abducting an 84-year-old woman from her home in a suburban neighborhood and then sending amateurish ransom notes to TMZ, that is simply not how they operate. There is another telling indicator. The FBI has not engaged with Mexican authorities in this case. That absence is significant and speaks volumes. If investigators truly believed a cartel was involved, there would be cross-border coordination at the highest levels. Interpol would be brought in. Mexican federal police would be collaborating. But none of that has happened, and that silence from the international law enforcement community tells its own story. Now let us revisit the masked figure in the doorbell footage through the lens of this theory. Some people have analyzed that video frame by frame and concluded that the gear, the backpack, the apparent weapon, all point to a professional operation. But does it really hold up under scrutiny? The person in that video appears organized at first glance, but then they are visibly confused by a floodlight. They fumble with the camera. They grab random debris from the porch to try to block the lens, improvising clumsily in real time. And here is a detail that criminal profiling experts have specifically pointed out. The holster the figure is wearing appears designed for a revolver, but they are carrying what looks like a semi-automatic pistol. That is a mismatch that a professional would never make. Someone trained in firearms, someone embedded in an organized criminal operation, would know the difference and would have the right equipment. Also, the gloves they are wearing are bulky and impractical. How would you pull a trigger accurately with those on? It does not make tactical sense. It suggests someone who is trying to look intimidating rather than someone who is actually prepared to use force effectively. So if it is not a cartel, why does this theory refuse to die? Because people are drawn to big, dramatic explanations. Cartels are frightening. They are mysterious. They are the stuff of movies and streaming documentaries. It is more exciting to believe that a powerful criminal organization is orchestrating events from the shadows than to accept that this might simply be the work of one desperate person who made a terrible decision and is now drowning in the consequences. But the evidence does not support it. The behavioral profile does not support it. And the experts who have spent careers studying how cartels actually operate are saying clearly and consistently that this does not bear their fingerprints. I know this is heavy material, but if you are still with me at this point, you are clearly invested in finding answers. Do me a favor. Share this video with someone who cares about true crime. The more eyes on this case, the better the chances that something breaks loose. And who knows, maybe someone watching has a piece of information they do not even realize is important yet. Alright? One final theory to go. And this one might actually be the most plausible of them all. Theory number 5. This was a lone individual who acted impulsively, got in over their head almost immediately, and now has no idea what to do next. This theory does not carry the drama of a cartel. It does not have the intrigue of a celebrity-targeted conspiracy. But it might be the theory that fits the available evidence most faithfully. Let us start with the behavior captured on camera. The masked figure in the doorbell footage shows unmistakable signs of poor planning. They are clearly trying to avoid detection, but they are also improvising at every turn. They did not anticipate the floodlight. They had no prepared strategy for dealing with the camera. Their solution was to grab whatever happened to be nearby and use it to obstruct the lens. That is not the behavior of a seasoned criminal who has done this before. That is the behavior of someone who is nervous, someone who is making decisions in the moment, someone whose heart is pounding so hard they can barely think straight. Then there is the equipment. The mismatched holster and gun. The bulky, impractical gloves. The backpack that appears full, though we do not know with what. None of it suggests genuine expertise or professional preparation. It suggests someone who consumed too many crime dramas and convinced themselves they could pull something like this off. Now let us return to the ransom notes and examine them through this lens. They were sent quickly, far too quickly for a calculated operation. They demanded money but provided no proof of life. They set deadlines that passed without any follow-up, and then came nothing but silence. That is not the behavior of someone executing a plan. That is the behavior of someone who panicked. Someone who thought they could extort a wealthy family, then watched the FBI materialize within hours, saw their own crime become national news, and froze completely. So who could this lone wolf be? It could be someone who knew of Nancy but did not know her personally. Perhaps a neighbor who saw her segment on the Today Show and suddenly realized she was connected to real wealth. Perhaps someone in the broader community who was struggling financially, crushed under medical debt, battling addiction, reeling from job loss, and who looked at Nancy and saw what they perceived as an easy path to money they desperately needed. It could even be someone who had the most casual connection imaginable. A person who delivered a package to her door once. A person who did yard work somewhere in her neighborhood. Someone who crossed paths with Nancy just enough times to learn her routine but not enough to appear on anyone's radar as a person of interest. Here is why this theory carries such weight. Most crimes are not elaborate heists with teams of specialists executing precision plans. They are desperate people making impulsive decisions in moments of crisis. And when those decisions spiral out of control, the people who made them have no idea how to undo the damage. This person may have taken Nancy believing it would be quick and simple. Get some money. Let her go. Disappear back into ordinary life. But then reality crashed in with devastating force. Law enforcement mobilized within hours. The FBI took over. Media descended from every direction. The entire country started watching. And suddenly this lone individual is staring at a situation they never imagined and cannot escape. If you are a lone amateur criminal in that position, you are terrified beyond rational thought. You are realizing you have committed a federal crime that carries decades in prison. You are realizing that every additional hour you hold Nancy, the consequences compound exponentially. You are realizing, perhaps for the first time with true clarity, that you have no exit strategy. That you never had one. So you go silent. You hide. You desperately hope that somehow, impossibly, this all blows over, even though somewhere deep down you know it never will. Here is the hopeful dimension of this theory, and it matters enormously. Amateur criminals are far more likely to make mistakes that lead to their capture. They leave digital footprints they do not know how to erase. They slip up in conversations with people they trust. They act nervously around investigators in ways that trained eyes can read. And critically, they are more likely to release a victim unharmed, because they are not hardened criminals capable of following through on violence. They are ordinary people who made a catastrophic error in judgment and are now consumed by the consequences. If this is truly a lone wolf situation, there is a real and meaningful chance that Nancy is still alive. There is a real chance she is being held somewhere while her captor agonizes over what to do next. And there is a real chance that person will crack under the mounting pressure and either release her or make the mistake that leads investigators directly to them. But there is still a question that troubles me whenever I return to this theory. If this was truly one person acting alone, how did they physically get Nancy out of the house? She could not walk far. She required assistance for even modest distances. That means either the perpetrator had a vehicle positioned very close by, or there was a second person involved in the actual removal. And if there was a second person, then the lone wolf theory begins to fracture. Unless we consider another possibility. What if the second person was someone Nancy trusted? What if she went willingly at first, not understanding what was really happening until it was too late to resist? That is a chilling thought, but it is precisely the kind of scenario investigators have to take seriously and explore. The lone wolf opportunist theory aligns with much of the available evidence. It explains the amateur mistakes visible in the footage. It explains the complete lack of follow-through on the ransom demands. It explains why the FBI might be closing in on someone who is not a professional criminal but rather an ordinary person who made an extraordinary terrible choice. But it also raises uncomfortable questions about how someone like that could execute an abduction of this nature without any assistance whatsoever. So where does all of this leave us? It is day 12 of the search for Nancy Guthrie. The FBI is actively tracking multiple persons of interest, but no arrests have been made. Lab results are steadily coming back. DNA analysis on those gloves. Digital forensics extracted from seized electronics. Frame-by-frame analysis of surveillance footage from across the neighborhood. Investigators recently erected a tent over Nancy's front doorway, which suggests they are conducting fresh evidence collection at the scene. That could mean they discovered something new, or it could mean they are reprocessing the scene armed with information they did not have during the initial examination. Law enforcement continues to focus attention on both Nancy's home and Annie's home. They have been observed interviewing neighbors throughout the area, asking about doorbell cameras on surrounding properties, tracking down every piece of video that might reveal a vehicle or a person moving through the area during the critical overnight hours. What do we know with certainty? Nancy requires daily medication. Without it, her condition could become life-threatening. That single fact transforms this investigation into a race against time, adding urgency to every decision investigators make. The masked individual captured on doorbell footage has not been identified. That person remains the single biggest mystery at the heart of this case, the thread that could unravel everything if pulled. The gloves found near Nancy's home are being tested for DNA. If forensic analysts get a match, whether to someone in existing databases or to someone who has recently provided a voluntary sample, this case could break open with startling speed. The family is cooperating fully with every aspect of the investigation. Savannah, Annie, and Cameron have made public appeals filled with raw emotion. They have stated clearly that they will pay any ransom if it is legitimate. They just want their mother back. The FBI is offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to Nancy or the identification of those responsible. That reward could prove to be the tipping point. Someone out there knows something, and $50,000 is a powerful motivator for that person to finally pick up the phone. What remains shrouded in mystery? The identity of the masked person on the doorbell camera. Whether the ransom notes were genuine communications from Nancy's abductor or an opportunistic hoax. Nancy's current location and physical condition. The true motive behind her abduction. Whether one person or multiple people were directly involved. And the identity of the family member who drove Nancy home the night before she vanished. Which theory do you believe is most likely? Family connection. Celebrity target. Insider with access. Organized cartel operation. Or lone wolf opportunist? Comment your assessment below. I am genuinely curious what you think after hearing all 5 theories laid out with the evidence behind each one. 5 theories. Each one carries compelling evidence in its favor. Each one also contains significant gaps that prevent certainty. The truth might ultimately prove to be a combination of elements drawn from multiple theories, pieces from different puzzles that somehow fit together in ways no one anticipated. Or it might be something entirely outside the boundaries of what anyone has considered yet. That is the frustrating, humbling reality of true crime investigation. We want answers. We want closure. We want the pieces of the puzzle to click together neatly and deliver a satisfying resolution. But real investigations are messy and unpredictable. They take time that feels agonizing to those who are waiting. Evidence has to be processed through methodical scientific protocols. Witnesses have to be located and interviewed, sometimes more than once. Digital forensics can take weeks to yield results. And in the meantime, through every one of those days, a family exists in a state of agony that most of us can barely imagine. Because here is what we must never allow ourselves to forget. Behind all of these theories and all of this speculation is a real human being. Nancy Guthrie is someone's mother. Someone's grandmother. She has a family that loves her deeply and wants nothing in this world more than to have her home safely. Every day that passes without answers is another day of unimaginable pain and desperate hoping for people who deserve far better. True crime is not just content to consume. It is real lives hanging in the balance. Real fear that does not end when the video stops. Real grief that no theory or analysis can ease. If you have any information whatsoever about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please contact the authorities immediately. You can call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. You can contact the FBI directly at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Or you can submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov. You can remain completely anonymous if that is what you need to feel safe coming forward. And there is a $50,000 reward waiting for information that leads to Nancy or the identification of those responsible. Even the smallest detail could be the breakthrough that investigators need to bring this case to resolution. That car you noticed parked in an unusual spot at an odd hour. That neighbor who has been behaving strangely since the beginning of February. That overheard conversation fragment that did not quite sit right with you at the time. Do not assume someone else has already reported it. Do not convince yourself it is probably nothing. Make the call. Because somewhere out there, someone knows something, and that single piece of information could be what brings Nancy Guthrie home to the people who love her. Hope remains, and it remains for good reason. Investigations take time, but they also advance in meaningful ways every single day. Evidence is still being processed in laboratories. Digital forensics capabilities are becoming more sophisticated with each passing year. One tip, one DNA match, one breakthrough moment could crack this case wide open and change everything. Nancy could still be brought home safely. That is what her family is praying for. That is what investigators are working toward around the clock. That is what everyone who has followed this case is hoping with everything they have. Stay updated on this case by subscribing to the Case Files Collective and hitting that notification bell so you never miss a development. Share this video widely. Someone out there might have seen something crucial and not yet realize its importance until they hear these details laid out together. Comment below with which theory convinced you the most. And remember, in true crime, the truth is often stranger and more unexpected than any theory we could construct from the outside looking in. For more deep dives into cases that will challenge everything you think you understand, check out the video appearing on screen right now. I break down another mystery that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Thanks for watching the Case Files Collective. I am here to bring you the stories that matter, the cases that demand answers, and the investigations that will not let us look away no matter how uncomfortable the questions become. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop asking questions.